today's session, I'm going to answer a question that came into us recently, and it was about cutting on soft leather on a template and pattern that had quite soft, gentle curves, and the leather is quite stretchy. So it's how to kind of find some tips and techniques to avoid that leather stretching when you're cutting your pattern pieces out. So for this purpose, I'm going to use, to demonstrate, this little kidney purse pouch. So it's one of those that you sew two pieces together like this with a hole on one piece, turn it inside out, and then it gives you, with a press stud, quite a nice little coin purse that when you open it you can tip your coins down. I really like it. It's just one of those simple ideas. So this has got quite a few soft curves on it, and it needs to be quite a thin soft leather to make this purse. Ideal use for upholstery offcuts. I'm also going to use today the soft calf. You get a bit more of a chunky one when you turn it out, but I quite like the look of that. This has got a little lovely soft grain on it that's quite sort of distinctive, and it's on the website, soft calf pieces, if you did want this one. It is a little, as I say, on the thicker side. Upholstery is perfect. You can do quite little discreet ones with the Napa leather as well, but they have a little bit more softness to them, so they can be a little bit too floppy. But for the purposes of this tutorial about stretch, the principles would be the same for if you're using something like the Napa to avoid getting stretch. So I'm going to give you two different methods to show you how to do it, and a little technique. The first one is, I'm going to turn the camera down a moment here onto the leather, and I've got my template here. Now with any pattern pieces, when you're putting them down, you want to be thinking about what's on the top surface, if there's anything you need to avoid, but you also want to be thinking about getting your absolute best yield. So I'm going to pop this down at this angle, because leather hasn't got kind of a cross grain like a fabric. You can go diagonally, and that's sometimes where you'll find a stretch of grain will depend on the where it's been cut as well from the hide, but that should be fine. Now you want the leather to be as flat as possible underneath, so I'm giving it a little tug and pull to get it so that it's really at its kind of peak, if you like. It's not without moving too much as I place the template down. If you've got a leather that's got any kind of creasing or has been rolled or got a little bit of a curve or anything in it, before you start, give it a press. So you want to put some brown paper down, put it on your ironing board, and use your iron with the 0 steam setting and on the 2 dots, and just give it a press on the reverse. So you've got the grain side face down, you're pressing onto the flesh side, the suede side, with the brown paper on the top, and then the iron. That will give you, your leather will be evened out before you start. That's going to really help you just to get your pattern pieces accurate. Now when it's down, I'm going to tape this in place. So I'm going to hold my fingers down on it. If I was using a bigger pattern piece, I would use weights to stop it moving. So because I want to make sure it's stretched down, as I go to tape it, I'm moving it out underneath. And then I'm going to go one end. And now I can see I've got a little bobble there. So I'm just going to lift that up and make sure I have got it as absolutely flat. The time you take doing this bit here is where you're going to avoid the stretch. And then I'm going to go round, placing the tape around. And if I need to, I'm just going to make it so that it's, when I put my hands on it, I've got a really smooth flat surface. Let's get that all the way around. Like so. So with this method, you don't need to draw onto the leather or anything. You're literally going to use this to cut straight out. You can see through the masking tape, the outline. And I'm going to use my craft knife for this, which I've sharpened. You can use also for thinner leathers these rotary knives, which are really good, and if you're practice with them, they can work really well. They can veer off a little, so you want to make sure that you're just going nice and slowly. And with any leather, and because you're going through the tape as well, you can angle these to get your curves in, but you just want to go slow. Sometimes it's good to just rock it a little just to get that line started. So these, as I say, these are perfectly legitimate ways to cut it out, but these can suddenly veer off if you're not used to working with them. So I find I get a little bit more control with a knife. Now, whenever I'm cutting leather, and I say to people in the classes, you want to start making your line and don't expect necessarily to go all the way through. Leather is a really dense, made up of really dense collagen fibres that crisscross over. So you want to get that first line in and then keep working into it. And you can hear the knife going through. And then you can hear the change as you get through to your cutting board. So again, stropping before you start is always a good idea. So that's now lifting away, and you just carry on cutting in that way, and this will have avoided any stretch. So if you do it in small sections, again, you can avoid pulling on that leather too far by trying to take one go, and it gives you control over any curves you're doing. So that's how you would cut using this method, and this is quite a neat method. Now the other method basically is pretty straightforward. You just would use some leather scissors. Now the reason that we can use scissors, so you would use scissors on fabrics and paper because they're thin. When you start getting to thicker materials, what can happen? So if I was to cut with this leather here, which is, as you can see, around about 2.5 mil, if I cut with my scissors, they cut fine, and it's not too bad in this example, but if I run my fingers over, what happens is you've got this thick blade on them because they have to be quite strong, and it can bevel as you're cutting. So when you're cutting your pattern pieces out, you can get this angle here rather than the cut being straight down. Now when you're trying to match pattern pieces up, that can be awkward. When you're trying to edge, you've got these kind of uneven surfaces when you've got it sideways on. So on thicker leather, scissors are useful if you just need to chop a bit off or whatever and then neaten up. But when you're trying to cut these kind of curves and pattern pieces, they're not so good. But on these thinner, softer leathers, they're absolutely brilliant. So you can go and just literally, you can have drawn this on. And again, if you've waited, again, this method with the tape will prevent more stretch. But when you're cutting with the scissors, you just don't get that stretch in the same way. So again, just taking the time to work around to the area where I cut up to with the knife. And again, the principle's exactly the same for cutting the hole out. So I've taped over it there. Now for this, the scissors are a little too awkward to get into that tight area. So for this, I would use the craft knife. So you're working through, you're first going through the tape and the paper, and then into the leather. And in the same way with the knife, just working through and following that curved line. Now, because this is so thin, we're not getting that, we don't have to worry so much about that angle with it. It's very, not discernible enough to worry about. So really, if you're doing something that's got these kind of complex curves, these little scissors, quite inexpensive, really brilliant addition to your toolkit for working with softer leathers. So I hope that helps you cut out your pattern pieces. If you would like a copy of this purse pouch pattern, then do message me and I'll get a copy over to you and see what you can make. Thanks for watching.